What is distributism? What does it have to do with Catholic theology? Should Catholics care, or should they embrace it? What's up, everybody? Welcome back to M Brings B. My name is Michael, and here at our channel we talk about raising a family on the good earth with great books and the beauty of Catholic tradition. As I said, today we're going to talk about distributism, and it shall prove to be a mildly controversial topic. Controversial because many people misunderstand what the name means. What does it have to do with politics? What is it? How does this work? Is it communism? That's one of the great fears. Is it just capitalism with a different face? What does it matter? All right, so before we can dive into any of that, I want to give a couple of caveats. This video is not going to be a full in-depth explanation of distributism in practice, or even lots of examples of how it works in the real world. I'll give some of that, but primarily I want to give an introduction that will kind of introduce where it came from, what does it have to do with the faith, and those sorts of things. And then from there, we'll build on this with later discussions. And as always, I'm happy to hear questions. If there are things you want to know more about, please leave that in the comments below, and I'd be glad to kind of dive into more of those for future videos. It really helps. So as I said, what is distributism? To understand where it comes from, you have to step back a little bit further, but the name itself is credited to the two men primarily who promulgated it as an idea. And those two men are two Catholic writers, G.K. Chesterton and Hilaire Belloc. Both of them are massively important figures of the early 20th century, or early 20th century, late 18th century. They were both born in the late 1800s, and their careers went on through their death, really. Belloc died in the 50s, I believe, and Chesterton in the 30s. And so if you're a Catholic, if you're a convert, you've probably read at least something by one or both of them. And if you're a cradle Catholic, I hope you have as well. Even if you're not Catholic, I'm sure you've read something by Chesterton as well. You've at least heard some of his witty quotes. They get stuck in your brain and you can't help it. So Chesterton is fantastic for a number of reasons, and Belloc as well. But Chesterton wrote with a very winsome personality, and he was great friends with people he fundamentally disagreed with. So he's a great example for those of us that are in theology, theologians who are hoping to dialogue with people whether or not they're in the church or outside of it, and giving a great example of fraternity and friendship and just good common sense. And the reason I say that is because all of that mindset is really where distributism shines the most. But to understand why these two men got together to talk about politics, socioeconomics in the first place, you have to think through what was happening. So in the 1800s, you're thinking of the Industrial Revolution. There was a massive explosion, especially in the West, in England, where they are from, here in the United States. There was an explosion, quite literally, of the changes in the way the economy was structured. Massive transitions, urbanization became an issue, and families were transitioning from an agrarian lifestyle to an industrial system where factories were mass producing everything from toothpicks to houses, and so this completely transformed the world. And in the process of this transformation, there was a number of things that went poorly, they went wrong. And the Industrial Revolution created, and it didn't create the disparity between rich and poor. It just happened to widen that disparity to a great extent, in the sense that in the early days of it, poor people had great opportunities to move into the cities, to get new jobs and build hopefully a little bit of wealth, and then maybe move out and kind of start their own businesses, those kinds of things. But the problem was the conditions in which these people worked were typically very terrible. They worked incredibly long hours. This is the history of the problems of the Industrial Revolution. I can't recount here, but suffice it to say, child labor was an issue, inhumane working conditions, long hours, people getting fired very easily, low job security, all sorts of things. Basically inhuman treatment of workers for the sake of profits for these people for the factory owners, the businessmen who were running these companies. Now, two things really happened to create a massive series of changes throughout the world. One was this Industrial Revolution, and as a result of it, sort of precipitating on all the things that led to it mattering in the world following into the First World War and everything, you run into what became this specter going all across Europe, and that was socialism. Now, socialism promised to address the concerns of this wage disparity, not just as a result of the Industrial Revolution, but through the revolution to create greater economic stability, more freedom, to remove the class distinctions, et cetera, that had caused the problems that they saw. The church, the Catholic Church, responded to socialism a number of different ways. Basically, because socialism, again, this is not a video directly on socialism, but socialism contradicts a number of very important concepts that are inherent into Christian theology. One of the most fundamental having to do with the dignity of human beings. And while the church agrees with a number of the problems that the communist is looking at to try to find a way to address, Marx is criticized by Catholic theologians because of his starting principles and the consequences of his political theory. It ends in greater disparity and less human treatment of other people. It doesn't give you what it's promising, in other words. And so the church responded a number of different ways. One of the most fundamental, theologically rich, but also pastoral, was Leo XIII's Rerum Novarum. It was an encyclical he wrote in the 1850s. And when that encyclical was written, it kind of took the world quietly by storm. There was a response to it. But as time went on and Christians were coming in the West to deal with this idea of communism, it was becoming much more sort of courant, and popular to deal with these concepts, as we can no doubt attest to today. It became sinking into the wider culture as an answer, as a potential answer at the least, for some of the problems in Western society. One of the things that inspired Chesterton and Belloc to write their sort of write on this concept of distributism was Pope Leo XIII's Rerum Novarum. They wanted to find a way to encapsulate Catholic social teaching, and if Catholic social teaching was ever given a chance to actually be in practice and to show itself and to live itself out and put flesh on itself, what might that look like? What could a truly Catholic society look like today? And distributism rests solely on this concept of what does that look like? Now, Rerum Novarum had a number of beautiful paragraphs. I would encourage you to read it. It's free. I'll put a link to it down below on the Vatican's website. You can check it out. It's a very encouraging read in the sense that it criticizes, but not in a heavy-handed way, the answers that communism at the time was presenting. As sort of an aside, I realize I'm probably going to there's a chance someone's going to respond negatively by saying you can't equate communism and socialism. At the time, it definitely was. At the time I'm talking about, it definitely was. Communists consider themselves socialist, so let's not nitpick too much on that. I'm happy to dialogue more with you about that, but I don't really want to, I realize that I'm equating them and I'm doing it on purpose. So that being said, when distributism was laid out, there's a number of principles that they wanted to they envisioned living out. And so basically the two concepts that are at play in creating this concept of the distributist are one, Pope Leo XIII's Rerum Novarum, and two was this concept very flowing through the entire life of Catholic social teaching as it's grown, and it's the concept of subsidiarity. Now, subsidiarity, you can look it up in a dictionary and probably see basically what it means, but subsidiarity has to do with this principle that the things should be handled at the lowest possible level. So, for example, the best example of distributism or subsidiarity at work is in education. So parents are the primary educators of their family. That right should never be. From a Catholic perspective, it is it's morally illicit to take away that right from parents. You can't. That's an abuse of the authority of the king, of the state, of the whatever, of your school system. Whoever is imposing and trying to tell parents they aren't actually the primary educator of their children, regardless of where they're schooled. They don't have to be homeschooled for that to be the case, but parents are the primary educator. They have a responsibility to educate their children according to their conscience, and they are called, especially those of us who are Christians, to raise their children in the faith. So this concept of not pressuring our children by presenting the faith in its fullness to them as if somehow when they're 20 they're going to have all the resources they need if they haven't been given any tools up until then, it's a little bit short-sighted to say the least, and not really going to help set them up for success just philosophically or eternally, especially if you believe what we believe as Christians to be actually true. So subsidiarity in the concept as a concept with education basically would say then that if the state comes in and says you have to teach these sorts of things, or you have no freedom to homeschool or to do private education or to do anything except for choose our one set of studies that we provide, and you have to do it this way and you don't have any choice, that is an abuse, and it's taking away the rights, the God-given rights of a parent to lead their child to educate their child, to guide them, to lead them to become, upstanding good citizens in that given society. Okay, so education is a great example because it's so common even today within the church for people to outsource their responsibility. And that's not necessarily a negative thing. I have specific opinions on whether or not we should look for a specialist for every single thing. If you want more information on that, you could read Wendell Berry. His collection of essays, The Unsettling of America, was written in the, I think, 70s. And they are sadly still prophetic and continually to be so. But one of his great arguments, and he writes for for farming, but also like the intersection of culture and agriculture. And he wrote very provocatively that the fact that that an American seeks, not just an American, but Western people seek a specialist for every single thing, right, is creating a problem. It's a very industrial model, but you can't necessarily apply industrial principles to every aspect of life because we're not machines, we're human beings. And again, a lot of information there, you can check that out. But this idea of seeking a specialist, the educator who's been trained, they know how to teach well, giving them the full control, and then this hands off. Like, well, I'm paying you to do that job, right? So this happens in Catholic schools all the time. Parents are then shocked to find out that that human being that they've entrusted their children's both spiritual and intellectual formation to was flawed and did not actually teach the faith perfectly, or maybe even at all. This is not an indictment on any specific Catholic school, but you can just Google it. There's lots of schools this is a cultural problem with. Okay, so if you put your kids in a Catholic school, you put your kids in a public school, if you put your kids in a whatever private school, or you homeschool them, you're still, no matter what, going to answer to God for the spiritual and intellectual formation that you provided them. And so this is the concept of subsidiarity at work in education, right? That decisions don't need to be made at the state level for something that could and most probably should be handled at the local level. And so having the most local level being the family. And so this is true of all sorts of things, not just education, right? So the ability to use your own property in such a way that would be constructive for your family to help build safety, and the concept of the way Rerum Novarum talks about it, and in Distributism sort of literature, writing about this idea of building wealth, because a man who's in charge of his small little tiny estate, a worker who's in charge of that little estate, is going to be a better steward. He's going to work harder towards maintaining and growing and building and protecting that little corner of society because he owns it. He's going to care about it and invest himself into it. And so basically, the reason that distributism is an important concept for this idea of subsidiarity and what Rerum Novarum is speaking at work is it's talking about the most wide distribution of property possible. Now, this goes in the face of socialism because property is not widely distributed. The state owns all of it, so it's a consolidation of property. Likewise, what we see in the West, especially in the United States today, is not the widest distribution of property possible. We have monopolies of power. You think of telecommunications, you can think of farming today, unfortunately, and I've got another couple of videos to do on that one, but there are basically every avenue of life. There are monopolies of power that are consolidating, not in the state, but in private conglomerate, business businesses, one business is owning everything. They have the lion's share of that. And it makes it impossible then for small firms, small people, individuals who create a cottage industry specializing, if you will, in some small thing to do that craft well. And then they can't break in, they can't compete, right? So if I decided I wanted to start my own internet company, creating broadband internet, there's literally no way I'm going to go out there as, myself and win the business of any larger telecommunications firm, because they've got the monopoly on the lines, the infrastructure. They create contracts to not compete with each other, and just anywhere you've lived in the country. Our house has just now recently, we lived in the house for a little over almost 3 years, and our house has just now got a competitor for the broadband internet that was in our neighborhood. There was no one else to choose from. There was no competition. So it didn't matter what they did that you didn't like. If you needed internet, you had to go with them. Now there's a choice, and that's great. But in many places in the country, you don't even get one option, and that's it. And that creates a bit of a problem in terms of creating the free market that we're arguing is supposed to be good for us. So the answer then for a distributist is not taking things away from the business owner so that you can give it to the state. The answer is in theory minimizing the ability for monopolies to occur, because you've already done the groundwork to spread this out so that people can then open small little industries at the local level to then serve that local community. Chesterton wrote very provocatively, as he wrote everything, in order to sort of get this point across of comparing the person walking down the street, passing shop by shop by shop, and going in there for that one item of that shop sell, and then he compared it to so I'll walk the equivalent of blocks inside a giant supermarket, like your Walmarts or Sam's Clubs or whatever, to get all those things, because it's more convenient for me to walk in one place as opposed to me walking the same distance in multiple stores and sharing that wealth, that commerce with those other local businesses who are doing that one thing. And obviously it's really hard, because very few places, very few small towns in the United States anyway, have now the infrastructure to support that level of subsistence as a local society. And that's something that a distributist answer would say, well, we need to find a way to create that. If there's a way for us to work together at the local level. And again, that localism, this idea of individuals working together at a very local level, is the most distributist answer to anything. So distributism is often challenged by conservatives, by Catholics certainly, who want to say, well, that's impractical, it doesn't work in the real world, you just need to be, a Republican or something, because that's the answer. Or the opposite is true. Well, obviously crony capitalism is so broken, and you need the state to come in and fix things. And we've got to have the state address things. And so there is basically, distributism is not tied and is untiable to any one given political party in the United States or to one political system. It's really a philosophy of applying subsidiarity at work wherever you live as a Catholic. And so in that sense, I would say distributism is the most Catholic approach to living in a society, because it isn't tied to if you've got a monarch or you don't have a monarch, or you have whoever's in power that you happen to disagree with on whatever side of the issue you're on. So in this sense, I think distributism is a fantastic and useful philosophy for us to have as Catholics, because it gives us that freedom to enact at the local level and work together with people that we would disagree with on things, because you do agree that, no, there shouldn't only be one franchise of pub, which is a great example that the author Joseph Pearce uses when he speaks on distributism. Of these pub franchises that had to get broke, that exist, and this is obviously a very English issue that we don't have in the United States. We don't really have pubs at all. We have bars, and they're not really franchises, and if they are, it's not the same sort of thing. So go check out Joseph Pearce talking about local breweries and the problems of pub monopolies. But I can't speak to that personally, and it won't be as good because my accent's not as cool. But all that being said, what is distributism? It's a social political concept. It is a lens of subsidiarity from the Catholic position of Catholic social teaching applied to the local, especially the local political system, whatever that political system is. Yes, of course, there are some systems that are diametrically opposed to this. It would be very hard I would say impossible to be a good distributist while you're living under a totalitarian socialist economy, because the state owns everything. They won't give it to you. They don't want to distribute that power because you're too dumb to know how to use it. We know better than you. And likewise, a capitalist system that is so specialized that it says, no, we'll handle that for you. Why don't you just buy from us, because we have the infrastructure we need to do this ourselves. We're going to do this. You buy from us. We're smarter than you. You're too dumb to know how to do it yourself. So both of these systems, the sort of totalitarian state system or the crony capitalist, let's put businesses in charge of the world, both of them fail to represent humanity from a Catholic perspective fully. But the distributist answer, whatever level of development or change or transformation is happening in that society as Catholic principles can slowly be applied to it. Wherever you are in that, the distributist concept, I think, is applicable wherever you live. And in that sense, yes, absolutely, Catholics should embrace it. But I'd love to hear what you disagree with. As I said, this is definitely an introduction to distributism. We've touched on the basic framework that sets it up. Where does distributism come from in the first place? I'm going to definitely have more videos on examples of how this works. But the things you have to understand when you hear this word distributism is it's a really kind of a weird word that's used to describe Catholic social teaching in practice, distributing that property to as many people as possible. That's simply where it comes down to. So the goal being enabling subsidiarity by leveling that, by spreading out that local level, the control there as widely as possible. As I said before, just an introduction. I'd love to talk more about this with you. If you have more questions, leave those in the comments below. You can contact me. My information's on the channel here. I'd love to hear from you, and I look forward to talking to you guys soon. Have a blessed day.